everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 15 of the Apothecary Diaries. Hey! Oh, and I'm excited because it's a little bit late at night. I got some tea because it's starting to cool off a little bit, so the tea is piping hot and ready to be talked about with this episode. So, let's dive in, shall we? I actually, for the first time, don't have a lot to talk about with this book. So I read chapter 8 a few days ago, and it's mainly about Sun Yao-ting. He's, since, Puyi, the emperor, has been expelled, they're going through a transitional period. And so it basically talks about Sun Yao-ting working as a house servant alongside some other eunuchs just to find odd jobs and kind of pay the bills while they figure out what to do now that the emperor no longer needs them. The one thing that was kind of interesting to note about is this book doesn't get preachy with it, but it really has moments where you're like, And to kind of relate back to last week's episode, it talks about that there is a lot of eunuchs that are addicted to opium in the palace, and there's a giant opiate addiction that's plaguing China, and they don't come out and say it, but everybody is rampant with opium. It's there's just opium everywhere, and that kind of reminded me of the pipe in last week's episode. So now Sun Yao-ting does not smoke opium because he's I don't have the money to do it. So he's I don't want to lose my money. But a lot of eunuchs that were making bank when they were in the royal palace, they've squandered their money away on opium. So he basically runs into a deputy chief eunuch that worked for the Empress Dowager Longyu, which was Puyi's mother, and that he had made a huge fortune, which would probably last him a lifetime, but for his opium addiction. In the palace, the most well-known opium addicts had been Wei Shangqing, who smoked his pipe every day. Yet a regular opium dose lasted him 2 days. Yao, on the other hand, could finish 5 doses in a single day. "There's nothing I can do," Yao sighed. "I'm hooked on it." "I know you can't give it up," Sun Yao-ting said, "but it would help a little if you smoked less heavily." "There's nothing I can do," Yao repeated. He sat down on the kang, made himself comfortable in a reclining position, and picked up his pipe again. Having waited on opium-smoking eunuchs in the palace, Sun Yao-ting knew a lot about the serving procedures, though he had never smoked a puff. While attending to Yao, he grew very skilled at opium preparation, and Yao became increasingly dependent upon him. And it goes on into more detail from that. But yeah, so he just talks about how there's so much addiction with the eunuchs, and they're just squandering all their money away on the opium. And it's really kind of sad to see, because at the beginning of the story, Sun Yao-ting was so impressed as a kid by how much money all of these eunuchs were making, and it made them look so lavish and they were just, so luxurious and bougie. And now that he's in his 20s, which is where the story is now, he's quickly figuring out that a lot of that is an illusion, and a lot of that money is getting spent on drugs. And he just quickly realizes how a lot of eunuchs kind of waste their life away just addicted to opium. So it's crazy, right? But aside from that, I want to talk about a couple comments. Anime Annie pointed out, and I'm going to read this verbatim, "I gotta say I love the use of the pomegranate when Mao Mao is thinking about how concubines in the imperial palace are seen as useless if they can't bear fruit. Pomegranates in some cultures is believed to help in cases of infertility. Pomegranate trees also grow 2 types of flowers, the vase-shaped flowers and bell-shaped flowers. The former are sterile and they won't produce fruit, while the latter will." Yeah, I thought that the imagery of the pomegranate was really interesting. I've seen that in a couple other anime, but I thought it was effective. And then both Anime Annie and H Banana 7 pointed out that the term used when describing the consort Aduo and the emperor as foster siblings, you can translate it to milk siblings within the context of the anime. This part of the word, kyodai, basically translates to siblings, whilst chichi translates to milk or breast. In those days, it wouldn't be uncommon for a prince to be fed by a wet nurse who usually had her own child still breastfeeding or slowly being weaned off. In many cases, these children have been raised closely, almost like siblings. So basically, Aduo and the emperor were, basically they grew up together, and Aduo's mom presumably was the wet nurse for the emperor. Imagine that. So yeah, it's so weird that they're just kind of they grew up as best friends and siblings, and then they did the deed and then had Jinshi, and then Jinshi's pawned off as the emperor's brother rather than his son. So here we are. The tea, y'all, the tea. But so I really appreciate those comments. I appreciate all the comments that I've gotten, honestly. I really am enjoying this series an awful lot. But Before we get started, I want to give a very quick shout out over to Patreon to not only thank those on YouTube that have subscribed, but to also thank my patrons, as well as the philanthropy tier, which include Alex Cornejo, Anime Annie, Be Happy, who is our moderator, Bryant Reed, as well as Dana, Damage3245, Danger Zone, Destiny Marie, Danny Donmai, Devorin, Ichu, Eric, Fisho, Ghostly Turnip, as well as Elfreya, Liam Poles, Lyndon, Matthew Palfinier, Murphy, Nameless Monster, Nicholas, No Nickname, Sunspots, Shimoyama, Translucent Men, and Trails. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. All of my love. So yes, I'm super excited to dive into this series. I hope you all are as well, but we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to dive into episode 15 of the Apothecary Diaries, and we are going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. There's a lot going down. In this episode, there's a lot going down in this episode. There's a lot going down this second half, isn't there? It's so funny because it's like on the outskirts, on the outside appearances, it's like, oh, well, there's not a whole lot. It was just a simple little investigating a fire and checking puffer fish, seafood dishes, nothing crazy. No, there's a lot of stuff going on beneath the surface, and I have a feeling in this second cour, it's going to all be adding up. So let's chop to it, shall we? Let's break it down. Let's establish some things as we go through this episode. So we've got some players on the board we need to probably talk about. We've got Lakan. She's our new pure consort. She dresses like she's from the south, but she supposedly is from the north. So that's interesting. Quote unquote. We're gonna put a big question mark by her. She seems, there's a lot of things this show does things where it either will make it seem obviously suspicious and it ends up being a red herring, or it seems like it's one way suspicious, but then it becomes and turns out to be suspicious in a different way. So Lakan seems very suspicious. There's a lot of suspicious L's in this whole thing. There's a lot of suspicious L's, except Lihaku. Lihaku's a Labrador, but another L. But yeah, it just, Lakan, we'll talk about Lakan here in a little bit. But definitely feel like Lakan is, it's interesting the South has been brought up so much in this episode, because that seems to be not by coincidence. I feel like maybe there's some political stuff going on. I can't remember if Gyokyo's from the east or the west. I feel it's the east or west and not the south, because I feel like her handmaids were talking about coming for the east or west. I could be wrong. I'm sure somebody in the comments will correct that, because they've gone back and actually looked. But I do think that she's interesting. And she also, I don't know if maybe my crackpot theory with her, because when they did the tutorial, she didn't say anything. And she didn't look like she handed the book off of all the sex stuff with all the poses and techniques and stuff. She handed it off to her handmaid to look at, not her. So here's my crackpot theory. I feel like there's some crackpot theories with each of these characters. My crackpot theory with her is that she is not the real consort, that she is a stand-in, that somebody from the north is standing in for her, and it's like infiltrating, and it's going to be a thing, and it's possibly going to try to like attack the palace from within scenario. That's my crackpot theory. What it could actually be is that maybe she's just shy. Or maybe she just has no interest in the emperor whatsoever, and it's one of those arranged marriage sort of situations that she doesn't want to be there. But I feel like it's going to be either one of those things. She's either going to be a player in this and is going to be relevant and cause some damage, or she's actually the red herring and she's just not really interested in there. What if she isn't interested in the emperor or men in general? That could be it too. Who knows? So we're not going to put it past it, right? We're just going to see what happens with her. But she was not the central point of this episode, so she's just going to go on the back burner. So then we have Lihaku, which we'll put up here. And Lihaku is our Labrador man. He is into Pyron, who is one of the V House girls, the princesses, and he seems okay. I feel like he's not hiding much. He seems like he could become a pawn in all of this and be used by Lakan, or he just seems like he's a muscly bro man, and he's just in it for the ladies, specifically Pyron, and he's just a Labrador. He's not too much to worry about. Although I think he could get complicated in that because he seems so kind of straightforward as a character, if he's convinced of something, he might prove to be problematic unless he seems to have a good rapport with Mau Mau though. So I feel like he trusts Mau Mau. So I feel like he could be end up being an ally more than anything. All the other eunuchs and military men, I don't know if these guys are eunuchs or just military men. They're like, oh, I heard a rumor that the servant girl helped solve the case. And they're like, da, da, da. And that's where Lakan, who is just leisurely, he's so slimy. He is poison. Maybe that's where Mau Mau gets it from. So we have Lakan. We're gonna talk about Lakan in this, or Lakan. And he seems slimy, and he is nosy. He's smart. Also very persistent to a fault. He also is a little bit sinister, which we'll talk about this. And also my crackpot theory with him is that he's actually Mau Mau's biological father. I think that is the whole secret with his character. He has blue eyes. Mau Mau has blue eyes. We didn't see the eyes of the concubine who mysteriously has the same hair color as Mau Mau, so I can't imagine who that is. His whole thing, we'll talk about it later, was that he said that he damaged the goods, so he brought down their value. So to me, it seemed like he liked Mau Mau's mother because she was smart and she entertained him, and he was more interested in her knowledge and her prowess than he was her beauty. Although I'm sure that didn't hurt. And so then there were two men that were trying to vie for her affections and trying to bid out to win her. So when he says he made it to where she was tarnished goods and they wouldn't want her anymore, and he said he played a trick, I think there's either two options with that. Option one, with the trick that he talks about, and we'll go back to that scene. Option one, the trick is that he poisoned her. Maybe in the OP, it makes more sense now, because in the OP, there's a woman with red nails, but then it shows the red nails with the shogi piece, and him, like, waking up from the dream, and the blue roses. Then I'm like, okay, was that her? And then it shows the roses dying. And then there's a shot on a bed of a hand that has bandages and poison, and you see his shadow in the background. So I'm like, did he poison her where her hand was like the bandages, and he poisoned her and she like gained this leprosy, and then maybe she fell into a coma, and that's why Mau Mau keeps checking on her, because she's wanting to see if she gets out of the coma or if she like gets her vitality back. And maybe that's why Mau Mau experiments on the poisons on herself. Maybe. Or he got her pregnant is my other crackpot theory. Because how would you damage goods? Well, if she's pregnant, they're not going to want to marry her and take her away. Now, both of those ideas are sinister and not very nice, but we don't know what the answer is. I instantly in my head have this crackpot theory that if he did poison her, and that's what the OP is relating to, then what if he tries to poison Mau Mau and then she reveals her arm? Because Jinshi's not seen her arm that has the bandage on it yet. He's not seen that. So what if she reveals the arm with the bandage and shows that she's been practicing with poisons, and that kind of shows like, I'm actually immune to whatever you used on my mom. Maybe. Who knows? Who knows? We don't know. But Mau Mau's mom was a courtesan. Imagine that. And I wonder if Mau Mau's actual father, not her biological one, but her actual one, the eunuch, his name starts with an L too. Is it Lobin? I wonder if he knows Lakan. I don't know. All these L names, they're hard to keep track of. And there's Lishu and there's Lolan. There's a lot of L names. And there's Lihua. Lots of L's. Lots of L's being used. But anyway, he's being nosy and being a little snake in the grass. And he finds out that Mau Mau's working for Master Jinshi. And they're like, Master Jinshi, really? And so then it says, didn't Master Jinshi buy out a courtesan from the Verdigris house the other day? And they're like, what? And like, I hear she's beautiful, intellectual with cold eyes. I hear she's a beautiful intellectual with cold eyes. That's what that is. Oh my God, I'm an idiot. So they're talking about Jinshi. Oh my God, this is like freaking Hannah Montana. This is Hannah Montana. They believe that Jinshi is associating with two different women. Oh my God. So the cold intellectual courtesan and then the servant girl. They're both Mau Mau. Oh my God, I'm an idiot. Yeah, I was like, when did he buy out a courtesan? Is he trying to like infiltrate? What was he to do? No, when he brought in episode 13, when he brought in Mau Mau to the outer court, they all saw her and she was all dolled up in her makeup and everything. And she was beautiful and smart. And they thought that he just bought her out. Okay. Well, if that's not got Lakan's attention, I'm not sure what else would. So there was that. Wow. She's literally Hannah Montana in the outer court. It's like Sailor Moon. We're like, I can't imagine how she could be Usagi. What? But yeah, I'm sure that got Lakan's attention that she was pretty. The guys who saw her wouldn't shut up about her. I'm sure that got his attention because he liked Mau Mau's mother, who was a beautiful intellectual with cold eyes. Interesting. And he wants to know more about that. Of course he does. He has blue eyes too, like Mau Mau. I wonder if he's Mau Mau's dad. I don't know. I won't be surprised either way. Anyway, so Mau Mau is just, arranging flowers, sprucing up the place. Suiren's not complaining. And Gao Shun is like, oh, Xiao Mao, could you spare me a moment? So Gao Shun has an investment in trying to figure out this whole deal with the poisons, which is fascinating to me because for Gao Shun to go up to her and ask, and this not be a request from Jinshi, is quite curious to me. I wonder if Gao Shun is suspecting whoever is killing these individuals is connected to the one that killed Jinshi's friend. And Gao Shun's trying to do his young master a solid by figuring out who this person might be. And he knows he can trust Mau Mau to research and give her honest opinion. One, because she's going to be honest. She's going to tell it like it is. And two, she's not going to tell anybody that she's doing the research for Gao Shun, so he knows he can trust her. So that's all interesting to me. He's like, will you take something? I like when he pulls out, my mind's in the gutter for a hot second. He's like, well, will you take a look at this? And she's like, but you don't have anything, sir. I would not kick Gao Shun out of bed for eating crackers. I'll tell you all that right now. So there's an old incident 10 years ago at a merchant's home. There was a food poisoning incident involving raw pufferfish. So this was 10 years apart. Interesting. So maybe the younger man, maybe the younger master, the master's brother that did the actual poisoning, maybe he learned about it through that incident. So, of course, Mau Mau wants to have the pufferfish poison. She's like, oh, it tingles and stings. I want it. She's like, I want some now. And Gao Shun's like, no. He's like, he even says, I can take you to a place that serves it sometime. And she's like, really? You can? She instantly like, whoop, gets all excited. Here's my thing. If she is Lakan's daughter, which she very well could be, I feel like there would be a whole arc or story part about her being like, you may be my biological dad, but you ain't my real dad. My real dad is the doctor that took care of me, the eunuch that took care of me out in the village. That's my dad. You might be my bio dad, but you're not my daddy. I feel like it could go that route, which would give her some commonality with Jinshi, whose father is not his father, And so they would both be like, look, we were raised by people, but our real parents are not the people that raised us. So like they could connect based on that, which would be great for them to find some connection. Gao Shun should instantly be regretting any decision about telling her that he'll serve her places that have poison. So he said, a while ago, I was officially involved with this case, and a colleague asked me for advice because a similar incident occurred recently. Curious. I find it curious that Lakan was asking him about the case. And my theory is that we're going to tie this over here. My theory is that his nephew, we're going to go back to that when we get the story from him, that his nephew is the one that has blue eyes, like he does, and is the one that's doing this poisoning for him behind the scenes. And here comes Mau Mau, who could legit solve and crack the case. Yeah. A colleague asked me for advice because a similar incident had occurred recently. She's like, a similar incident? And yeah, a bureaucrat ate pufferfish raw and seasoned with vinegar and fell into a coma. And she's like, a coma? Well, I don't think pufferfish poison would cause that. And of course, Mau Mau's like, she's like, is this appropriate for me to get involved? Because again, she's like, I don't have all the power, and if I mess up, my name's kind of on the line. I don't want to use conjecture. What am I getting into? And Gao Shun's like, well, that won't be an issue. You're someone who knows her place. Gao Shun says it very matter-of-factly. He's like, you're not going to say anything because, you're going to be quiet about this because it's important. And then, here's the thing. Jinshi needs to be taking lessons from Gao Shun. Why he's not, I don't know. But he needs to be taking lessons because Gao Shun knows how to push Mau Mau's buttons. He's like, well, it involves poison, are you sure you want to take this on? This could be awfully dangerous. Like, just dealing crack in front of Sherlock right here in our salads. And she's like, sure. She's like, okay, fine. Please continue. He's like, good. He's also a very tall man. Gao Shun is huge compared to her. So they talk about the pufferfish and that they served it. It was parboiled and they served it and the meat and all. And Mau Mau instantly is like, well, the poison's in the gut of the pufferfish. So the meat alone wouldn't cause somebody to fall into a coma. She's like, I don't think it would be enough to do a lot of damage. He says maybe it depends on the environment or where it's from. Kind of like, you eat honey from certain places to get immune to like the pollen and everything. So the interesting part is that this time and in the past, the cook claims they hadn't used pufferfish in the dish. So something is amiss, and that's when they find out about the seaweed. The two who fell ill, they were both gourmets who loved eating rare foods. To me, see, the moment they said that, I was like, well, they both often ate raw fish and pufferfish was one of their favorites. To me, that seemed like an open invitation to be like, well, since they were purveyors of fancy bougie food, you could easily write off, oh no, it wasn't prepared right, or oh no, we didn't know it was poisonous, or oh no, they ate this and we weren't sure what to do, and write it off as something else. But the fact that all of the poisonous elements were already in the trash, it's like, well, that kind of rules all of that out. The cooks claimed innocence, said the pufferfish was served the night before, and on the day of the incident, they used a different fish. So it couldn't have been the pufferfish. There were no witnesses to provide proof of this. But yeah, they ate all the food served and then became intoxicated and collapsed an hour later. Of course, this is like Mau Mau's dream. She's like, I would love to be in this state and have the antidote and be able to ride out that wave. What's interesting is that Mau Mau seems to wonder why Gao Shun is so invested, but she doesn't say anything. And he's like, what do you think? She's like, well, they sound like pufferfish poison, but I need more details. She's like, I'm not going to tell you anything until I have solid evidence. And then she asks him to find more. And he's like, of course. And Gao Shun is effective. He is very on it. He's like, I'll find you some info, girl. Don't you worry. Meanwhile, she's like, at this time of year, it's not rare to have food sit out for a few days. She's like, but using different fish matches the evidence of the leftovers. The moment that Jinshi pops in, he's like, oh, what are you talking about? Like, Jinshi gets out of the shower. He, like, wipes himself off. He's like, oh, they're gossiping. I want to know what it's about. The face that she makes, I do not understand why her reaction Well, I'm sure in the manga, and I'm sure in the novel, it happened much more abruptly and it was surprising, but that was a damn Yelena from Attack on Titan face. That was like a, what are you doing? That was a horror manga face. I was like, what? Girl. And she was so surprised. He's like, why would that look would wound anyone? He's like, why would you give me that look? Meanwhile, Suiren is like, sir, you need to dry your hair. And he's like, what was Gao Shun talking about? And she's like, well, people naturally pay attention to stories that are actually interesting. The thing that's so sad is that she's like, well, but you ignore me. You interrupt my stories. Mao Mao's not trying to be mean or shady, but she just comes off and he doesn't, and she just, it's so funny. She's like, I'm going to take my leave. And I love that Suiren's like, you poor boy. Poor Jinshi. I don't think Mao Mao means any ill will by it. He's like, well, I'm not done talking to you. And she's like, no, don't move. And he's like, what did I do? Poor Jinshi. I feel for him. Mao Mao doesn't know that he likes her, and she thinks he's just weird. And I'm like, he actually loves you, girl. I wish you'd realize that. Damn it. Anyway, Gao Shun comes back up to tell Mao Mao about what's going on, and he finds her the cook's notes to tell her what's there. It describes everything that was served at the meal. I like that she's just sitting there dusting all the random things like you do. And then she's like, add the vegetables and season with vinegar. It's very basic and it's very adaptable to whatever season that they're cooking in, which makes a lot of sense. But the thing about that is because it's so vague, you could easily add a certain type of vegetable that could cause some damage and it wouldn't seem suspicious, right? So then Jinshi shows up and he's like, oh, hey, I feel so bad for Jinshi in this episode because he just wants to help out. He is literally Lestrade. He is Lestrade from Sherlock. You have Watson over here, which is Gao Shun. You have Sherlock, which is Mao Mao. They're solving the cases. And Jinshi's like Lestrade being like, well, hey guys, what's up? And they're like, oh, hey you. Oh, you're just the authority. Okay. I feel so bad for him. Poor guy. We need to know what's actually around to cook the dish. And he's like, you can't understand? And she's like, poor Jinshi. I feel for him. He's just wanting to help out. She's like, he wants to join in. Like, leave him alone. Jinshi gets a lot more childish around Mao Mao. And I think, Gao Shun notices, Suiren notices. He's able to, like, be more of himself. It's super cute. I'm like, come on, Mao Mao. Anyway, so he's like, well, what can't you understand? Like, he tries to be like, I like he's about to eat something, and then Suiren's like, it's gonna be mealtime soon, don't do that. He's like, okay. Suiren has an ironclad hold on this entire establishment. Mm-hmm. And then whenever Mao Mao's like, well, that's quite childish of him, I'm like, girl, give him a break. Jinshi's just being normal around you. So then she's like, well, when did the incident occur? And they're like, about a week ago. The winter vegetables would probably be radishes and carrots. So I thought maybe the radishes were going to be poisoned. And that's when he says seaweed. And she's like, ooh. She's like, that's unusual. Why seaweed? That's out of season. It's like, I guess he could have tried strange seaweeds if he liked rare food. But instantly, Mao Mao knows that there could be poison involved, and she's like, yes, let's go. Let's look at the kitchen. It's very interesting because now that we have the possibility of Lakan being maybe her biological dad, there is an aspect about Mao Mao that seems similar to Lakan. Not necessarily the same sliminess, but there's like a devious mischievousness to her that I can see in Lakan. And so if he ends up being her dad, I can see it, but then she seems, based on Lakan's description, a lot more like her mom. So, and I could be totally wrong. Lakan might not be her dad, but he has blue eyes. The personality's kind of there. It's like, maybe. I don't know. I could foresee that being the twist. Anyway, she goes to the castle and meets up with Basin. So Basin's interesting. He's here. He doesn't look too happy to be with her at first. But I'm curious about Basin because Basin, I don't know if Basin is the one in the OP either or if that's the nephew. But Basin has heard about her from Gao Shun and Jinshi. He helped Jinshi spar, so they know each other. And she's like, I'm Mau Mau. And he's like, you're my follower. So I'm not sure why I'm not sure why he has a negative view of her, but I'm curious. I'm very interested to know what's up with him. Because he just seems to like want to get this over with. Interestingly enough. And she seems to know him from somewhere, even though she says she's never seen him before, but he looks familiar. She's like, I wonder why he doesn't have a good impression of me. I'm curious about him too. He doesn't really look like any of the other characters, so I don't know who he could be related to or what the deal is. But yeah, they go in the kitchen, and that's when she finds the seaweed. And we find out that the one brother, he didn't want her over there because he was obviously suspicious. So there's that. I feel like maybe what's interesting about this whole scene is that the one guy that ends up being the culprit, he doesn't want them there, but Basin is very objective. He seems to question Mau Mau as well, but he still lets Mau Mau do her thing. So I'm very curious about his whole stance and what his deal is. I don't know about Basin. Basin's interesting, but I'm not sure how this all goes. So he's the master's younger brother. Anyway, she finds the seaweed, and then they go, and she sneaks out with it because Mau Mau's amazing. And she's like, this is very strange because seaweed is not in season, so how'd he keep it in the jar? It shouldn't be fresh. It shouldn't be preserved this long, right? Unless it's salted a certain way, like in lime water. And he's like, I don't think it was gathered from around here. She's like, maybe it was imported from the south. And then it would be good if we could find out where it came from. And so then Basin's like, oh, okay. And she's like, I think he gets what I mean. I'll do what I have to do. She's like, we need to find out the source of it. Where did it come from? I like that Mau Mau is trying to be objective as possible and is like, look, let's figure this out. Maybe Basin is in the OP with them or in the ED. Maybe he's the one that's there too. Maybe he's related to Gaussen. Who knows? So she's like, I split the poo and put it in some water. And she's like, why is Jinshi here? I'm like, girl, Mau Mau in constant denial of Jinshi's importance is hilarious. I'm like, girl, when you gonna realize? But not this episode, that's for sure. She's like, why is Jinshi here? The seaweed was indeed imported from the south. So, according to the servant, the master never ate the seaweed in the winter. Okay. So he didn't eat it. So the cook also said this is the same seaweed they normally use and can't be poisonous. And she's like, well, you can't assume it's not poisonous just because it's the same seaweed. There can be things affected. So we find out that the poisonous seaweed is also from the south. Curious that all this is happening around the same time. I'm sure it's not connected in any way, shape, or form. But then she talks about maybe the seaweed isn't eaten often in the south. So perhaps a merchant learned that it's a favorite of this bureaucrat and looking to profit went out of his way to get some locals to make a salted version of it. And then she's like, well, why does that matter? And she says sometimes poisons can become not poisonous. And then she talks about eels as the example, which my brother loves eels and sushi. Bleh. I'm like, I feel like eels are too fishy. I don't like them. But you can bleed them out and cook them and they become edible. So then she talks about, in the case of seaweed, it has to be soaked in lime water first. And so she's like, but this seaweed has not had that happen, so I'm just going to eat it anyway. And so this seaweed's just been in water, and they're like, oh no. And he's like, what are you doing? I love that. Actually, Basin does look a little bit like Gaussian, but I think it's just the hat that they're wearing. I love it though. So basically what she was saying was because they didn't soak it in lime water, she's like, it's actually poisonous. So they didn't do the proper steps to make sure that it was edible. Makes sense. So I love that Jinshi takes care of her though. He's like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, it's fine. Probably. And he's like, what do you mean probably? And she's like, I have this emetic agent right here. And then she's like, oh, well, don't say that so proudly. And he's like, Gaoshun, yes. I love that she becomes this little cat and Gaoshun immediately grabs her. And she's like, wait a minute. And he's like, now vomit now. How is that not a meme of Jinshi's face saying vomit now at high speeds? Oh my God. That is hilarious. And she's like, fine. That is so damn funny. Jinshi's like, you're not going to poison yourself. She's like, I wanted to test the detox if we could do it overnight. Oh. And she's like, anyway, so who suggested the trader bring the salted seaweed? That's the question. Who didn't do their research and who suggested it? That's the main question. If the one who ate it imported himself, well, that's his own fault. But if he didn't import it himself and someone else suggested it, then there's cause. There's some cause for concern. And that's what they've got to figure out. And so bringing it in from a region that doesn't eat it is taking a pretty big risk. And they're like, And she's like, great. I like that Mama says, I don't have to elaborate any further. Y'all figured out what I'm talking about. So we know whoever brought this in is probably guilty, and it turns out to be the brother. So then Gaoshun says, when he found out that, with the seaweed, his motive was that being the younger son, he wasn't treated well. And he said that's pretty commonplace here, which is kind of hilarious because Jinshi is supposedly the younger brother of the emperor, which is hilarious because the emperor relies upon Jinshi to be his lookout. So that's hilarious to me. But then the reality is that Jinshi's not actually his brother. So changes things a little bit. And Mao Mao's like, well, how could a person who'd plot to murder someone for such a thoughtless reason? Like, why would they do that? And how could they have learned about the seaweed poison? So then we have the man that supposedly he learned it from. The person sitting next to him at the tavern, apparently, who I think is related to Lakan, who would maybe be related to Mao Mao. She's like, happen to, sure. Interesting. Meanwhile, and we have the sword hanging up. I don't know if the sword hanging up is from Jinshi's place or from the tavern. And of course, Mao Mao's like, I didn't get to try the poisonous seaweed. Sad days. And then she's like, what should I use it for? So then she's talking about the mushroom, the color of dry leaves growing from the dead insect. Oh my God. Mao Mao is so excited about she is so excited to have access to this mushroom and what all she can do with it. The funny thing to me is that Mao Mao, I can relate, girl. There's certain things you like, and you like them more than people. It makes sense. It's all fine. But she's so excited in that moment. She's like, can I make a booze? A pill? Which, again, I know that there's a possibility that Lakan's not her dad, but Lakan being interested in nothing except for Mao Mao's mom, he just likes shogi and other things. Sounds similar. But yeah, she gets all excited and she bumps into Jinshi and then she says, welcome home, and says it in the most girlish, excited, little cutesy way. And then, of course, Jinshi sees that. Oh, I've got to take a picture of her with that look because then he just bangs his head against the wall. And the thing about it is, I don't know if he's banging his head against the wall because he's trying to rid that view from his mind and he doesn't want to see her that way, or if he's just like, oh my God, that's disgusting. I can't look at it any other way again. I can't decide. It might be both. And they're like, what's going on? He's like, it's not my fault. Then, of course, he has like the wound on his head. Jinshi God. They're like, you seem so tired. So that's when he says that there's someone I don't get along with, which, oh my God. Like, what if, again, I'm on this crackpot theory that Lakan is her real dad. What if then you have Jinshi, who had just had tea the last episode, or had wine with his actual biological father, who he thinks is his brother, but then he doesn't like this man that could be Mao Mao's actual father, which is the father of the woman he loves. The drama, the tea. This man he doesn't get along with. So anyway, we can't see eye to eye. And then Mau Mau's like, I didn't think you wouldn't get along with people. And he's like, well, this is a man, not a woman. So he's a razor sharp high official in the military. That's why the military bell was ringing. That makes all the sense. Okay. So he's a high officer in the military. I need to point that out. So he probably is connected to Lihaku a little bit. He's this high official. Razor sharp, they say. And he comes from a good family, but even though he's past 40, he hasn't married. So it sounds like he was in love with Mau Mau's mom and then never... I thought at first that they were going to be like, well, he's gay or something like that. I thought that was going to be the case. He doesn't like women, or maybe he's asexual or just doesn't want a family, whatever. But, I mean, he's old enough to be Mau Mau's dad. He adopted... What did they say there? I just missed that. Said he adopted his nephew as his son and has him handle the household. So the nephew... who he's adopted as his son, quote unquote. All these people adopting family members, changing them into different family members. It's a lot. So he's supposed to handle the household. Okay. A famous weirdo. I wonder if Mau Mau knows him based on what she's heard at the brothel or based on what her father's told her or whatever. She seems to kind of know. His interests are go, shogi, and rumors. Interesting. He files complaints, barges in, and keeps extending deadlines on decisions that need to be made. Yep. He has it out for me for some reason. Oh, I'm sure because you're in a position of power, but I'm sure this adds to it now. Now that he knows that you're connected to Mau Mau. So, anyway... And then she's like, let's forget about this. No good can come from dwelling on this. I'm like, girl. So I think she knows. I think she knows who this man is and knows his reputation and possibly knows who he is. But just, here's the thing. Mau Mau is so pragmatic that once she has it in her mind that something is the way that it is, she can't be deterred from it. So she knows who this man is and she has a conjecture of who he actually is. She doesn't want to, she's like, now's not the time to have this realization or to bring this up. She's like, nope, I don't want to be part of this. Nope. I love that she's like, I'm going to let water off a duck's back, let none of it affect me, so don't you all worry. She's like, but no matter how hard I try, my bad hunches are usually correct. So then, of course, before we find out what those hunches are, he comes over. And what, oh my God, what a twisted contrast it would be. You have Mau Mau's foster father, who she believes to be her dad, to be the man growing flowers, growing the herbs, making the gardens. And then you have the man that's possibly her biological father, who wants nothing to do with the flowers, nothing to do with the herbs or medicinal things. The contrast, the symbolism. So he comes swinging in this like little teapot. Lakan, a strategist. And then she's like, he's confronting me is because I made Mau Mau, who's connected to the Verdigris house, my servant. He's like, I have an old acquaintance in that house. And Jinshi's like, I thought he was interested in romance. For one moment, Jinshi is like Mau Mau, and it's like, oh, buddy. Jinshi's like, where's this going? I like Jinshi has the Gendo pose there. I think that's really funny for Jinshi to have the Gendo pose. Like, usually that's when things get revealed. So then he asks him, he's like, well, what kind of courtesan is she? And of course, Lakan's like, baited him to ask. He's like, I asked without thinking. He said she was a good courtesan. She was very good at go and shogi. I could beat her in shogi, but never in go. And that's when he pours a little wine. And then she must have been good to defeat you. He said, I considered buying her out since I felt I would never meet another woman as interesting as her. So that's setting up something too, because what Lakan is setting up is also this idea that what if Lakan, here's my concern, is if Lakan knows that she's from the house, the brothel, and knows exactly where she's from, she might go back to the older woman. He's a military official, so he probably has money. If he thinks that he doesn't want her to be involved with Jinshi, he might go to the house and try to get something stirred up where some other military guy, likely Haku or somebody, tries to buy Mao Mao just to keep her away from Jinshi because he's a slimy, bitter old man. And Jinshi would be like, shit. So to me, it feels like they're setting up where Jinshi is going to be possibly faced with the idea that somebody might try to buy Mao Mao. And the brothel owner, she don't care. She'll sell Mao Mao because she wants to make the money. And so it feels like it's setting up a similar situation, right? But sometimes things just don't work out. Two rich men with curious tastes endlessly tried to outbid each other. And Jinshi's like, so what's the point? I like that Jinshi is like, what is this slimy old man getting at? Even though he's 40, so he's not that much older than me. And there he's like, at times buying out a courtesan could cost as much as a small palace. She was a strange courtesan. And I like that Jinshi's like, what is he getting at? I feel like he's drawing so many comparisons to Mao Mao that Jinshi starts to get it. She would sell her skills, but never herself. Yeah, his eyes kind of look like Mao Mao's. In fact, she didn't treat guests as customers at all. Then we get the image of her. And she, of course, she has Mao Mao's hair, right? She doesn't have the big boobs. She has like she has a more slender face than Mao Mao. Even when pouring tea, she had an arrogant look, like she was being charitable to a lowly peasant. But there were many with curious tastes who were head over heels for her. He's like, myself among them naturally. That chill down my spine was truly irresistible. And then Jinshi's like, oh, that seems kind of like someone we know. But then he's like, I wanted to force myself on her one day. I'm like, ugh. And then Jinshi and Gaoshin are like, well, that's a gross locker room talk for you to have with us. We are a little bit disturbed by that, sir, but thanks for admitting that. He's like, I couldn't give up on her, so I had no choice but to use a bit of a dirty trick. And then Jinshi's like, and if something's too expensive, you just lower its value. And I made her less exquisite. But then we don't. And he's like, do you know how I did that? And that's when we don't find out. And he's like, why play hard to get all of a sudden? I like that Jinshi's like, why don't you just tell us what it is? Quit beating around the bush. But I feel like we're going to find out eventually. So it's either poison or he got her pregnant with Mao Mao. One of the two are my theories. And he's like, well, I'm not going to tell you my story until you get my favor. So he has this will that he wants the servant girl to decode. Now, why he wants her to decode is for probably a number of reasons. One, because he's trying to test out to see if she could be, up to par with him or Mao Mao's mom. Or he's trying to see if she's going to be a threat to him and he wants her gone. So he has these three children are apprentices that he died before passing his secret techniques to his children, whatever that entails. He left a puzzling will that might be a hint as to and he's like, it's been bothering me for a while. And Jinshi's like, why have us deal with this? I wonder if there's some way to learn that secret technique. Or perhaps, by example, having your clever servant girl take a look. Oh, I don't know. And I thought Jinshi was going to say no. But, I thought Jinshi was going to say no, but he wants to know about the trick that he pulled. And we all do too. So I'm like, damn it. Here's the thing too. I feel like in some sense, Jinshi might not have had a choice because if he said no, he's talked about how persistent Lakan has been. So there's a very strong chance that Lakan may have kept coming back. Right? Probably. And then we have Mau Mau drop the little pan and look over, saying that's a lot of rain. Oh my God. So yeah, no big deal. No big deal, y'all. It's fine. It's all good. Everything's gravy. I could be totally wrong with this theory about Lakan. I put a lot of eggs into my Lakan is Mau Mau's dad's basket, and I could be very, very wrong. I could be totally wrong. I don't think I'm wrong, but I think I could. I won't be surprised if I'm wrong, but I'm putting those eggs in that basket. I definitely think that the person with the blue eyes is connected to Lakan. I think that's his nephew. And I think he's been poisoning people. I think Lakan is worried that this girl is going to figure it out, aka Mau Mau. But also he might be curious to see if Mau Mau's who he thinks he is, who he thinks she is. And then Jinshi is going to figure this all out, and it's going to be crazy. So, yay! Anyway, I'm excited to see where it goes. But in the meantime, I'm curious to hear your thoughts down below. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with more of the Apothecary Diaries. Bye!